So it's going to be a minute or two while we let everyone join in. So please bear with us. And in the meantime, I'm going to ask Rob for one of his infamous predictions. He's really good with these. Last year, he predicted a total apocalypse or something like that. So Rob, what do we have in the future?
It wasn't an apocalypse. It was a well-informed. It was a well-informed prediction by. I just sat through a session with Citibank, and they said that there were a number of large-scale firms that were in trouble last year, and that turned out to be complete BS because y'all did awesome. So my prediction for next year, this is true, and I think this
is. I'm ready.
I think into next year. Well, leave the profits and money and all that aside. I think this is more of a general prediction of where I think we're heading. I think law firms over the next 2 or 3 years, two things. One, you in this particular department will be using at least 3 pieces of technology in this particular arena to do your jobs. No one solution will fit. And I would say by this time next year, I'm going to say that 50% of the top 50 firms, not this time next year, 2 years, will be cloud-based.
Okay. So I actually think those are good predictions, but you realize this was recorded, so people will be able to.
I have no shame. I know.
Apparently.
I'll say whatever I want. You got to put me back next year and prove me right or wrong. How's that?
Oh, there we go. This will be an annual event. I like it. Okay. Well, let's get this party started. Hello, everyone. My name's Toby Brown. I'm the Chief Practice Management Officer at Perkins Coie. I'm obviously involved with Lvn. I'm an officer and founding member. So we want to first thank you all for joining today. Before I introduce the program, our moderator and panelists, let me say a few words about the organization. The Legal Value Network is a growing community, and we've actually topped 900 business professionals now. So we continue to grow. The board and numerous volunteers are all working together to bring members curated content by way of webinars like this, our Council of Luminaries series, our monthly e-newsletter, which I have to thank Craig Lambert for doing such a great job with that, our Off the Clock podcast, and the recently published Legal Pricing and Practice Management Survey. Lvn is also providing ways for this community to engage with one another through its roundtable programs, women's initiative, and of course through our annual conference. This webinar is brought to you by the Lvn Webinar Committee, comprised of 15 individuals who have been working for months to develop a full slate of offerings for you, our members. The content is based on 3 educational tracks. Number 1 is innovation, number 2 is pricing and LPM, and number 3 is called Beyond the Technical. Today's program is part of the innovation track. If you are not yet an Lvn member, please visit legalvaluenetwork.com and select the Become a Member tab and sign up today to ensure you continue to get all this great content. Also, be sure to follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. Now, a few housekeeping items. First, the only video feed you're going to see is that of the presenters. Everyone else will be on mute. Opinions and information shared here are those of the presenters, unless otherwise stated. We will be recording this session and making it available on the website soon after. And finally, questions are encouraged. Please submit your questions. There's a Q&A function in Zoom. Use that to submit your questions. We're going to be watching that. With that, let's get to our program. Today's program titled Pricing Tips to Maintain Profits in 2021 and Beyond. I mean, this is, I think, well aligned with Rob's predictions. And I'm happy to present our moderator for this afternoon, Rob Stote. Rob is the Managing Director and VP of Profitability Products at BigHand, and actually a really nice guy. Rob, welcome, and thanks for joining us today. I'll pass this over to you, and you can introduce the panel and begin the discussion. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Toby. And by the way, we should have read that first bullet point about the opinions are mine and mine alone before I did that.
Fair enough.
We'll stick with that. But so no, thank you, and thank you for Lvn for having us. So quick, as Toby mentioned, a quick intro to myself and BigHand for those who are not familiar with who we are and what we do. BigHand is obviously a software company in legal. We've been around for about 25 years. And in my particular role, I'm in charge of our pricing and profitability, or our financial productivity products. We have 3 main pillars of products, one being financial, one being workflow or people productivity, and the last being document creation. I think for the folks on this webinar, I think of interest to you would be our financial products, which I'm talking about, or we'll talk about a little bit, as well as some of our resource management tools. And with that, I'll bring in our group. I think joining me today are Lance, Micah, Crudy, and Andrea, and I'll let them introduce themselves and their roles at their respective firms. We've got a pretty good slate of topics that we're going to talk about, and I think as Toby mentioned, we're sort of talking about the future of pricing and profitability, and how we sort of maintain our profit levels going forward. And what we did in our pre-call and our planning for this, we really broke it up into 3 big chunks of sort of topics or areas of interest. And the first will be people, the second will be process, and the third will be the use of technology. And we did have a bonus question in there, or bonus topic, which we'll get to towards the end, which we haven't advertised, only because through our preparation for this, we kept circling back to a particular topic that we think is germane and important. In fact, I should have included it potentially in my predictions for next year, because we think this will be of interest for most folks going forward. So with that, I'll start. Micah, why don't you introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Crudy, and then Lance and Andrea, and then we'll kick it off.
Sounds great. My name is Micah Ascano. I'm a legal project manager at Jones Day. I've been in this space for about 8 years, have a background in Lean Six Sigma, and I'm also I also teach at Stanford University, legal project management and legal operations.
Excellent. Go ahead. Crudy, you're up next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Crudy Mehta. I'm the Chief Client Value Officer at Stote. Prior to that, have been in practice management, marketing intelligence. Also am a master black belt in Six Sigma, and have been in the industry for over 15 years. And prior to that, professional services, both financial services and advertising services.
Excellent. Lance?
Hi, everybody. I'm Lance Lucy. I'm the Senior Manager of Legal Project Management at Ogletree Deacons. Prior to coming over to Ogletree a little over 2 years ago, I was general counsel for a couple of different companies. And I was a general counsel who insisted on outside counsel using LPM and pricing strategy and analytics. So that's how I made my way over. I first started in 2008 on doing law firm analytics. So been practicing attorney now for about 15 years.
Nice. And Andrea?
Hey, I'm Andrea Menezes. I'm the Solutions Manager for the Profitability product at BigHand. And prior to this, I was working in pricing at Ropes & Gray and Goldstein Stores.
Excellent. All right, folks, just quickly before we jump in on the first topic, for those who are participating virtually, please feel free to use the question and answers feature in Zoom. So if you click on the bottom of the screen, there's a Q&A feature. There's also a chat feature, which we'll be monitoring. We do encourage those questions. We've got a good slate of topics we hope will encourage participation, so feel free to pop those in. We'll get to those as we go through the topics, or we may save some of them towards the end, depending on the flow and depending on how many they are. So again, the premise for today is sort of maintaining profit and profitability through next year. As Toby was quick to point out in our intro, I made a terrible prediction last year, and I thought law firms were going to be absolutely underwater this year. Clearly, I don't know what I'm talking about, so that's fine. So with that in mind, how do you maintain those going forward, as we've obviously seen a record year for a lot of firms? How do we maintain those forward? And we'll start with people. And I'll start with this statement, and then we'll turn it over to the group. So the statement really is that roles have changed over the last year, we think, in the pricing and LPM world. Different people doing different things. And now that sort of the expectation of what the business professional at the firm can and cannot do or should do, I guess I'll turn over to the group and say, how has the role changed, and has it changed for the better? Again, thinking in mind of as we go forward and how we maintain profitability. So who wants to take the first stab at it? Micah, I'll pick on you.
Sounds good. I think for us, what really changed was, because we're a fairly new department in the firm, is that we kind of became a go-to resource for whatever problem that came across their plate. You know, as we stopped being in the office, we stopped seeing people in person, as cases and matters are pushed out and rescheduled, and different client needs are kind of pressing different agreements like M&A type deals. We became the go-to solution to figure out what's today's status, how do we communicate that on a regular basis, how do we solve today's problem, please help me because I don't know where else to go. Because we look different than your typical marketing or IT resource. We kind of became the go-to fixer or problem solver for whatever was happening, especially at the very beginning of things back last spring. And that helped get us the buy-in to change our roles to be more of a holistic problem solver and focused on not just profitability as a number, but matter management, which then leads to better profitability through better managing of the matter and better communication with the client overall.
Right. Would it be fair to say that that's almost bleeding to a customer success role?
I think so. I think a lot of these roles kind of blend together. And I think we sometimes struggle to decide between what's a pricing role versus LPM if we're both budgeting and creating a project plan. And we're talking about customer success, where do we draw that line between LPM managing a matter versus a happy client? I think they all bleed together and every firm kind of defines it differently. But as long as you have that kind of non-attorney business focused role on those things, I think you're going to get to the right spot.
Nice. Crudy? That way.
So just as the financial crisis was a watershed moment for the legal industry, I think the pandemic was and is a watershed moment as well. I mean, we saw after the financial crisis kind of the birth, if you will, of LPM, and now we're seeing that second generation, if you will. And so at Steptoe, for us, we're a small department, growing department. So for me, the focus is on bringing individuals in who not only obviously understand profitability, but can look beyond the numbers. We need professionals that can actually analyze the data, interpret the data, explain the data to our partners. And we can't have, 5 different people doing that. We're going to have an individual wearing multiple number of hats in a number of different ways. So that's one. 2, we've seen an increasing demand, particularly over the last 12 months, at least in RFPs that I've seen cross my desk, where clients are expecting that we have individuals holding these roles. So how do firms such as Steptoe, where we may only have 1 or 2 legal project managers, how do we acquire the talent or support that kind of expectation? So for us, it's also thinking about the evolution and the natural outgrowth of training and leveraging talent within our existing pool of individuals and practitioners. And so for that may include paralegals and associates and conducting specific training on legal project management core concepts. These folks are embedded in the case teams and can serve as our deputies and ambassadors. But more importantly, they're also seeing their roles change in the legal marketplace, right? And more importantly, they want to see that next evolution of, kind of how to tap into beyond just practicing law. I mean, particularly for senior associates and managing associates who are, seeking to be more business professionals, business minded, and on a path to partnership.
Hey, Rob, you're muted.
You're muted, Rob.
That's the second time I've done that on a webinar. In fact, I did it on the last Lvn webinar too, and someone like, dude, you're on mute. So anyhow, apologies. Anyways, and it was a brilliant statement I just had too, but y'all missed it. So anyways, Lance, as we were talking earlier, building off of what Crudy said, funny enough, there's an area of looking internally, but then I think you guys have sort of brought in people externally, people that traditionally haven't come from the legal background in terms of data scientists and things like that. So maybe talk through some of the stuff that Ogletree has done around talent and people going forward.
Yeah, what we've seen is, in addition to what Micah and Crudy pointed out, is we've seen this kind of request for data and more data-driven policies and pricing strategies and things along those lines. I always kind of looked at LPM and practice intelligence and pricing as a triangle with arrows pointing every which way to each other. And I think that those arrows are getting shorter. I think we work more hand in hand with the other departments now, and there's a greater blend of those functions now. And it's just based on the pandemic brought on a real need for accuracy in your budgeting and pricing process, and both internally and externally. And I think we've have a very robust practice intelligence group now, and they're just providing wonderful analytics for us and giving us the ability to be much more accurate based on the numbers and the data with what we do and what we forecast. Now, that's not to say clients don't want strategy. They do. It's not replacing strategy, but I think they do like to see data-driven strategy in some cases. And it's been what we've been seeing in RFPs and once again internally as well. The attorneys, when you're pricing during tough times and nobody knew what the future was, especially not Rob Stote, when you're practicing during tough times, everybody has that drive and that need for accuracy. So that's where we've seen the change. Clients are using e-billing systems that give them more, and other tools that give them more analytics, and they kind of want to see us match that. And the attorneys want the data as well. As we all know, reverse auctions, the request for more and original AFAs, we've got to be really careful with how we price things and how we matter manage. So I think these trends that we were seeing prior to COVID, I think got accelerated during the pandemic.
And I think it's funny because, and before we move on to the process side of it, I think the interesting thing I'm seeing at firms too is, and I think you all touched on it here, is the ability to have well-rounded people in your department, the people that understand, what a client's expectation are, understand, to be fair, Lance, to your point, the ability to, they may not necessarily be gathering the data, but understanding how to interpret the data so they can communicate that both to the partner, the associate, and to the client, I think is important. And Crudy, to your point, taking people internally and giving them a path in which they can go is important, which we're sneak peeking to our bonus topic as we get towards the end of the call here. But the ability to provide people a path or a runway in their careers, I think, is extremely important. So with that, I think it's funny, Lance, you just sort of mentioned this idea of firms and the expectation and strategy and whatnot and the process. So why don't we talk a little bit, Crudy, I'll let you take the lead on here in terms of the process. Last year, obviously, everyone had to be flexible, had to be be sort of understanding or be flexible in how they approach problems, how they approach their clients. Different clients came out with different requests, et cetera. We won't get into all the different kinds of requests that clients had, but this idea of process and how that helped move clients along. Why don't you start a little bit about sort of, the perspective of what Steptoe has done in order to help clients through this and what your expectations are and theirs are as well.
Yeah, no, for us, this has been critical. I mean, again, we're a young department, so to speak, on the infancy, on the spectrum of legal project management. Pricing has been deeply embedded in the organization for a number of years. So from a process standpoint, at least since my arrival in the last 12 months, it was absolutely critical for us, as I knew that we were going to be launching LPM in a more formal way with both people and process. It was absolutely critical that we had literally tracking of every single matter that came in the door. And by that, I mean matters that had an alternative fee arrangement attached to it. We had to start to build in an expectation among our partnership that if they proposed a fixed fee of $5,000 or $10,000 or $20,000 or $200,000 or $2 million, that someone was going to be managing and monitoring it. And we certainly couldn't do it just sitting in Excel and with static tools. So we'll get into the technology portion of the conversation, but we needed to bring in technology pretty quickly and leverage existing technology that was already in place at the firm. So that was one thing. The second thing was ensuring that we had leadership-driven, top-down mandates. And by that, I mean our leadership team, from our chair to our vice chair, along with our practice group leaders, were folded into the process. So if there were any significant overages, the partner knew that big brother or big sister was going to be watching. I mean, the one thing, and I would love, for my other colleagues to talk on this, is we saw, at least in the last 10 months, 12 months, a very, very little appetite among our client base to tolerate any excessive overages in the, unless it was scope driven. If there was a material deviation in the scope, maybe then and only then would the client entertain a discussion. But, these 30%, 40%, 50% overshoots were just not going to be tolerated. But more importantly, our partners needed to know where they stood in terms of work effort versus what was billed. So we instituted that pretty quickly, and and routinize that pretty regularly. We've now progressed to literally tracking every matter that has an expectation of over $250,000 in fees billed, and adopting some formal processes, standard templates, all of the fun things that LPM brings to the table, and then starting to bring in the talent to manage and monitor that.
Say fun is one way to describe it.
Yeah.
But maybe we'll go, Lance. Why don't you pick up where Crudy was going with that? This idea of the process of monitoring and managing, and the importance of that.
Yeah, once again, it just that need became accelerated during COVID, and the days are gone where you could tell a client, hey, we'll get your financials to you in 24 to 48 hours. I found that as a practicing GC, we were under private equity due diligence in a couple of the positions I was in, and they would call and say, we need the financials on this within 10 minutes. So that luxury of just kind of pushing that off a little bit is gone. So having tools that give you the ability to make that client facing immediately and internally as well, because the attorneys want that as well. And you got to be a little careful, because the big tendency is $1 million solution for a $10,000 problem, and we certainly don't want to go down that road. And our attorneys are certainly more and more honed in to the need to monitor matters that may not even be significant in the eyes of the industry. It might just be a $50,000 matter, but they want to be able to look at it and say, hey, I want an alert when we get to $40,000 and things like that. And here's my plug for BigHand. That is why we invested with BigHand in the tool, to give us that capability to do it. And I think it's been very well received so far. We got a lot of work to do. It's always evangelical with attorneys, and we realize that in LPM. But yeah, and as far as overages, I couldn't agree with Crudy more. I think the need for communication is greater than ever with clients. And from my perspective, when I was ever told there was going to be an overage on a matter, if the attorney communicated with me and explained why, and if there's rationale, then that was much easier for me to sell upstream than if there wasn't. If somebody said, gave me some answer that equated to basically, we just didn't manage this well, then obviously that was going to be contentious. And so the communication process was key in those situations.
And I agree there, Lance. I gave the example that earlier around an acquisition I was part of, where the firm came to us, that was managing the buy side 8 months later with a massive overage, and we were just like, we're not paying that. Like it just no insight to it coming, no understanding of why it happened. All of a sudden it happened, and we're like, we're just not going to pay that. So as a client, we're just like, we're not going to outlay that, and the firm was out, right? So Micah, maybe why don't you talk a little bit about the importance of process, specifically around this particular topic of overruns and managing expectations, et cetera.
Absolutely. So we actually implemented a Power BI as a tool that's updated daily on the budget to actual, so that all attorneys for matters that they work on can immediately see where they are on budget to actual, or if there's no actual budget, just the actual, so they can kind of have an idea, because we still have plenty of clients who don't have a particular budget or an AFA involved. You still want to know where you are, so there aren't any surprises. But for us, during again the first 6 months of the pandemic, there's a lot of unknown going on. We found that communication was really the thing people were asking for, and we had a M&A deal that was happening that had multiple countries, multiple time zones, and the key players couldn't be on every phone call, every email. It was just too much. So we actually created a process to have a form that's linked to a smart sheet and automation, where a senior associate who's on these calls can make a kind of a quick report, a summary of what the conference call was about, list any action items, list who those action items belong to, and it would get forwarded to the key senior partners on our side. Well, our client found out we were doing this and said, well, why don't I get those? So we set up then to also give the same conference call summaries to the client, have any action items for the particular in-house counsel. And that way, everyone knew what the status was. It was going through an automation that would collect all these conference calls and send it out once a day at 5 p.m. That way, you're getting one end of the day summary of what's going on instead of 50 emails that you don't necessarily see. And we let the client open up and see kind of our to-do checklist in this tool. So they had a better understanding of what there was left to do, who's doing it. And because it was cloud-based, we actually opened it up to the other countries' co-counsel that we're working with, some tax consultants that we had in other various countries. And so we're all on the same page, could see the task, where people stood, and it really helped kind of calm things down from where are we, what are we doing? Because even from the client side, what they wanted to do was kind of shifting day to day because the market was shifting so much too. And everyone had to be kept in the loop on that.
Right, and it's interesting that you say that the communication stuff. There's a couple questions that have come in that I think will throw a bit of a curveball before we move to the next topic, but I wouldn't mind. There's a question I had on something you said, Crudy, and there's two questions that have come in. The one that came in first we'll save to the end because that's part of our bonus topic. But the one that came in, I think if you want to grab that one from Kayla, Andrea. Oh, yeah, mute. Go for it.
So her question is, what are your best tips for evangelizing LPM to attorneys?
So Lance, you said the word, so we'll start with you.
I think success stories are the greatest tool that I have found. Implementing this new tool, and we're already having success with it. And as we run the testing on it, we hope to develop that a little bit more and get analytics around it, and then be able to put it on display for the attorneys. And the other thing is simplicity is definitely part of a solution. And if you can sell the simplicity of the solution to the attorneys, that helps a lot. We have some very sophisticated attorneys, technologically speaking. We have some that aren't so much sophisticated with technology. And we have some attorneys that are very, very aware of the need for LPM. And at the first shareholder meeting I went to, I gave a presentation on LPM, most of the room left, 6 of them came up, surrounded me, and started asking me questions. And so I took notes of who those 6 attorneys were. So as we went through the process evaluating these tools, we included, as you know, Rob, we included an attorney team, a very robust attorney team, some who had technology experience, some who were afraid of it, and it worked very well for us. It got us buy-in from the start, including them in the process. And then, like I said, going back to success stories, that has been our most successful tool.
Yep. And Crudy, maybe I'll turn to you for a second, because I think maybe slightly different take on it. You'd mentioned sort of you had top-down sort of buy-in or whatnot. So from management,
Right.
How did that work for you guys in terms of getting adoption and getting people to sort of think about the process?
Well, it helps when the vice chair of the firm is a litigator. It helps when the vice chair of the firm not only is a litigator, but a practicing litigator. It also helps when the vice chair of the firm has one of the largest clients who demand budget. So that was one benefit. Right. But the second, I think it's just, tacking on to Lance's point, we started piloting in some of our largest practice groups LPM concepts. And by that, I mean developing standardized templates, developing, from a budgetary standpoint, developing a kitchen cabinet who could really talk to, making things pretty easy for our lawyers. So the minute an RFP hit, the minute a request for a budget came down, we were able to spit those out pretty quickly. And it was a product of drawing from experience that the firm already had versus reinventing the wheel. The more that our partners could see the ease in the approach, the more willing they were able to get on board with some of the rolling up the sleeves that would have to happen in order to get where we needed to be, right? So that was very helpful. But I think I can't express enough from firm leadership to practice group leadership to some key partners, having those individuals be embedded and be able to proselytize and evangelize the process makes a huge, huge difference. But it's also important to have the pricing and the LPM professionals be at the ready to assist, because the two go hand in hand. If you don't have the talent, as we just talked about, along with the process, along with the leadership, it's just going to crumble.
Right. No, I agree. And Mike, I'll let you maybe take us home on that one before we move to technology. Anything, you come from obviously a very large firm. I know we're speaking from our personal perspective here, but that's pretty unique given the size, right? So anything there around the process and how you maybe roll that out going forward?
I think for us, because we're so big and have so many different countries and different, kind of cultures of how law practice should be done, We have some things that come from top down. We finally moved to a space where weekly task code entry is now required. And if you fail so many times, there's some unknown consequence. But for us, it really comes from more the individual partner or practice group level, where we see a successful matter that we've worked on, where we've had good client relations, or just easier time working with attorneys to get where they need to go for budget. Once we have that success, it's word of mouth. And we love it when practice group leaders mandate use or mandate a certain process, which we have had some success with. It really depends on the practice group. Some of our biggest practice groups are still a little bit unwieldy to have that come down as a mandate, but word of mouth is really our biggest bread and butter. And we've seen a lot of spread through that is, hey, I've heard from so-and-so that you did this for them. Can you do that for me?
Right. So, and I agree. I mean, I think we're sort of all saying the same thing here in the sense that you have to, and we'll sort of wrap it up on our takeaway on this one before we go to the next one, which is really this idea of blending, as we just said, having the right talent crew, as you said, having the talent around you ready to go. Lance, as you said, having that and being able to build on past success and being able to sort of have those use cases or case studies, say, look, this process, this thing does work. And then ultimately having management buy-in, really helping you set the expectation, and Micah understanding, if there's a takeaway as well, is understanding that depending on your firm size and makeup, there may be different geographies, different sort of approaches across practice groups and geographies where certain things will lend themselves to a process better than others. And just because, the reality is if you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of your practice groups doing this, you're in a much better state than just one. And so pushing that process and making sure that it's clearly defined and making sure that people who are involved in the process are known throughout the firm as a resource that people can go to, I think is probably a key takeaway from a process perspective. Anything to add, anyone, before we move on to technology? Excellent. All right, so tech. So introducing the technology component here. We know, and we've sort of touched on this and alluded on it a little bit, that technology plays a large part. And for those who were watching, caught me laughing and pointing at Micah when he mentioned Sparksheet. He owes me $5. We did agree that every time he says that word, he gives me $5. So that's fine. So he already owes me $5. But it's clear that technology helps. And I kid, the reality is Smartsheet's a great little product. It's a great product. So the reality is technology plays a crucial part in this entire process, as people are using technology to accomplish these things. So, and it is clear that it is now permanent. And the prediction I made as people were joining is I think that there isn't really a one size fits all in terms of solutions. There's going to be different solutions being used throughout the firm and different areas and different aspects of the process. So with that, I think I'll start with Lance. Maybe I haven't started with you yet, I don't believe. Technology. The question is, making use of tech, how's it helped, et cetera, and where do you see it going in terms of maintaining the firm's profitabilities going forward?
Yeah, Rob, first of all, you have no choice because in most of the RFPs you receive now, one of the very prominent questions is what technologies do you use? And they want a description of that. Clients want a detailed description of that. And I've always said from a client perspective, I think you have to show a very on point and well-rounded technology strategy that, and I say this in bold letters, that drives client savings or efficiencies. You can spout off all the technologies you want to a client, but as a former client, my question was, well, that's really impressive. What does it do for me? How does it save me money? How does it show efficiency? How does it help you budget more accurately for me? How does it help you develop case strategy for me? So as we know, there's various technologies out there on the market. Ogletree Deakins is certainly progressive in their approach to implementing technology and managing matters and predicting outcomes of cases and finding intelligence on judges, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's great technology out there now. What I make the statement again because I had it happen more on the corporate side than I did the legal world, that the last thing you want to do is $1 million solution to a $10,000 problem, because that just happens a lot. And you implement a technology and then nobody really understands it or knows how to use it. And I haven't seen that at Ogletree. I certainly saw it in some of my former positions, but I think selling to the client what it does for you and answering those questions in the RFPs and making it hit home for them about here's the time savings it brings to you. Here's how it makes our forecasting more accurate. Those kind of things, I think, it's just expected in the market now. I can't remember the last time I saw an RFP that didn't have a question around what technology are you using and how does it help us? And to get more specific, LPM, the same thing. What LPM technology are you using and how does it help us with how you manage our matters and forecast budgets more accurately? So yeah, I don't think it's a choice anymore. I just think it's so client driven, which honestly makes it easier for all of us trying to get that technology, because if the clients are putting it in every RFP, the attorneys notice that.
Right. And it's interesting you said that too. And I think we've seen that as well, that this idea of what does it do for me, like how maybe, and I'll turn to you, Kruti, on this one is how do you effectively communicate that, and how do you maybe the client's already asking you, I don't know, but around sort of how do you effectively communicate that, yeah, we do have a process, we do use technology, and this is how we're going to use it to benefit you.
Well, it's twofold, right? An extension of your question and Lance's statement. One is how do we communicate that effectively to our clients who are increasingly demanding innovation and making sure that their law firms are innovating. So that's one. So for us, we're looking at solutions and exploring solutions that also our partners can easily explain. One of the other things that we have to be careful of is pricing LPM and even just law firm professionals is just as our clients are demanding innovation, our partners, some of them are not changing as quickly or are getting overwhelmed by all of the technology. So we needed to be careful as we were introducing new technologies, how it could benefit our partners and ultimately what was the value proposition for our clients. And for every underlying value proposition, it has to be for our clients, how is this going to help you, help me? And secondly, from a partner perspective, how can I eliminate five or six different platforms and make sure I'm just utilizing one? We have a profitability dashboard. We had another dashboard that we utilized to harness our experience, and we had another dashboard for our LPM team that we tracked budgets to actuals. We needed to have a single source. And we also needed to have a tool that our clients could easily access as well. So that's why we went with, unfortunately, Rob, another tool to provide our LPM and pricing support that one, our clients could access, and then our partners could easily enter information into.
Right. I'll mute you now, but that's fine. No, but no, I actually I didn't mute you. You did it yourself. No, it is interesting. The reality is the sophistication aspect, and I'll turn it to you here, Micah. I did a session a couple of years back on the Thomson Reuters forum, and one of the things that came up is there is an expectation that the reality is your clients are getting more sophisticated, and there's an expectation that you as a firm will answer that. And the reality is, with sort of the disaggregation of services, et cetera, that the reality is you may be involved in a piece of litigation that multiple firms are working on, and they're able to provide something that you may not be able to. So maybe, Micah, you want to talk a little bit about sort of this idea of the increase of sophistication of client and how you meet that expectation with them around maybe collaboration and things like that?
Yeah, and I think it's exactly right. I think, a few years back when clients started having RFPs say, what do you do for LPM or technology? You could say you had one LPM and you bought a piece of technology and you'd pass, and you wouldn't actually have to show any effort of that use when you started the matter. I think today we still see a little bit of that happening where, you're asked a question up front, but you don't actually have to follow up. But I think that's changing, and clients are expecting to have more, access to financial data at their convenience when they want it, direct access, or that, instant information when they request it. And I think as they become more advanced and understand what they can get from us, that we have a responsibility to provide that. And I don't necessarily think it has to be one end-all be-all tool, because I don't think there is a catch-all tool that will do everything we need, but we need tools that work with each other, that are streamlined enough where you can have different people use it in different ways. I think it's important for, your business professional like us to do high-end, interesting things on the back end, but for when the attorney needs to touch and do something quickly, they're not overwhelmed with all the possibilities. We need to keep the process of the user interface at a point where it can still be self-service, because we don't have a firm full of 100 LPMs. Who can find them, right? I mean, as we kind of mentioned, and we're going to talk about, like, we don't have that kind of number of resource. So we need to build out a process that works for the flexibility of what the client needs and is requesting, but still ease of use, where attorneys and legal professionals who are not necessarily the most technically savvy can still access it and provide the client with what they need, or give the client direct access in a usable, practical way.
Right. And I think it's interesting. I was going to point to you, Lance, actually, because I think you were, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to build on this, Rob. I think part of what we've discussed at Ogletree is making this process part of the onboarding process, so that associates and others in the firm get this right up front. They hear that message that this is something that needs to be done as this law firms evolve. And so we are in discussions now with that group on how to implement that. And we want to be very careful with that and make sure we don't overwhelm people. But and for thought down the line a little bit in the future does it become part of the evaluation process for these attorneys, that they do matter manage and they do implement LPM and they are using the tools? That's probably a ways off, and that may just be my aspiration. I may lose or win on that front, but that's kind of how I envision it in the future, is making it part of the process that the attorneys are, that it's at least considered as they matter manage.
And it's interesting you say that. Before we move on to our bonus topic, the one thing that I've seen too that's worked at firms, and Lance, it's right to your point, is there's an initial education piece, but one thing that we've seen with firms that really help is there's always sort of a continuing education going on. There's always something happening where if you can always sort of keep it not top of mind, obviously the attorneys and others are very, very busy, but if it's always sort of a steady little drumbeat in the background that they understand the importance of this, and to your point, sharing success stories internally, sharing, it's no different than software companies sharing success stories with the public, like, hey, a firm X did this with our software, it's great. It's no different than you guys internally, right? Hey, we worked with this practice group, these matters were awesome, and this sort of continuous sort of messaging of positive feedback will get people to buy in. So to wrap this one up before we go to the question, which I think will lead very nicely into our next, there's another one too, into the next topic. I love your saying, Lance, about $1 million problem for a $10,000 or $1 million solution for a $10,000 problem. So I guess I'll sum it up by saying this, that technology and investment technology without the right process, which we talked about, and the idea sharing is kind of a waste of time and money. I think is probably the best way to say it. So if we're moving forward on how we maintain profits for firms going forward, the proper use of technology backed with the right process going forward will pay dividends. So we got a couple questions coming in. I think what I'll do is I'll get the first one, Andrea, the first one that came in very early on. Let's read that one. And that will lead us very nicely into our bonus topic, which we had not talked about earlier, but go ahead.
So Sarah asked, do you find it difficult to find LPM talent to hire? How do you see the demand for LPM talent changing in 2021?
So when we first started talking a few weeks back in preparation for this, we started talking about people and everything. And then Crudy immediately threw us a curveball and said, what about the war on talent? And I'm like, well, that's not what we're here to talk about, but okay, let's go. And so we started talking about this topic, which I think is very interesting because it plays all to this idea of profitability and people and talent and process, et cetera. So the bonus topic for the remaining sort of 10 minutes before we sort of wrap it up is the war on talent. What we've seen as a byproduct, we believe, and we'll share this with the group, and hopefully there's more questions that come in on this, is a byproduct of the pandemic and sort of this idea of coming out of it is, I see it in the market. You guys are involved in it. There is definitely a war on talent. There is people being poached, move around, which there's different things that happen there. Salaries get driven up, whatnot. However that happens, there's the impact to the firm. This idea when people leave, it's very hard to replace them. And we talked a little bit earlier about trying to find talent internally. So I'll let you kick it off, Crudy. We only got 10 minutes, but I'll let you kick it off. The war on talent. What's your initial thought on that, and where we think we're heading in the next 12 to 18 months around talent and moving?
I think for pricing and LPM professionals in particular, one of the big changes that we saw over the last 12 months is there is increasing demand, and there's increasing demand among the legal industry to hire professionals because of just this outgrowth. So we're all competing for the same talent pool in the same talent base. And so as a consequence, just as we've been talking about innovation among our technology, we've got to be thinking about innovation among our people base as well. From where do we pool the talent? Where do we draw the talent? It could be internally. A couple of things at Stote that we're looking at, as I mentioned before, is paralegals and associates. So that's, natural outgrowth. The second is thinking about individuals outside of the industry, thinking about how do we train, how do we grow, how do we retain our talent. One of the big things that I've been focusing on in my year at Stote is we have got to apply some of the core principles that, frankly, our clients apply in managing and retaining our talent, which is one of our biggest core competencies. We can't talk about profitability if we don't talk about the people. And so how are we bringing folks onto our teams? What kind of career path are we giving our professionals, bringing on junior talent, which really wasn't a concept in the LPM space. Let's think about bringing on LPM analysts, LPM data specialists, whatever it might be, as an opportunity to grow within the department as opposed to grow out of the department, because that's what we're seeing. We're just seeing a lot of movement for people who say, you know what, beyond an LPM, I just don't see any other movement outside of that. So a couple of different concepts for folks to start thinking about, which is professional development. How do we grow and retain our most junior talent? And how do we draw from other sources that may be comparable to the legal industry?
I'd like to jump right off that and just say that, first off, as someone who does not have an advanced LPM title, recruiters who are not familiar with this space are emailing me all the time. Right now, I'm getting probably 3 to 4 contacts a month from anything from entry level of 2 to 3 years to more. And it's crazy. And I talk to them because I'm more curious about what they're seeing themselves. And they're saying there's no one out there who's filling these requirements that people are looking for. And what that really tells me is we as an industry have done a kind of a poor job at developing entry-level LPMs. It's easy to poach. It's what we always do. We don't want to build it. It takes too much time. We want it today. Instant gratification. But I think we as professionals in the professional space really need to push back, not just at our individual firms that we work for, but as a profession to say, this is how we develop an LPM. Now, everyone's going to have a unique background. I know the first kind of wave of us, we all kind of came to this space in a very different, unique way, and that's really neat. But when you have people in law school who say, I want to do something different and I want to get into this, or someone who's just coming out of undergrad saying, hey, that sounds kind of cool, I want to dabble in that, what do we tell them? How do we tell them to get there? And while I adjunct and teach a class at a university level and they take a class in LPM, I'm not sure I would hire them as a 5-year experienced LPM after my one class, but it shows they have interest and there's a need for these entry-level positions. And I don't know why we're not investing more on that end, realizing we may not keep them for 10 years, but we probably will have more cost benefit from training them up from an entry level at probably half the cost, and then keeping them as long as we can until they get poached for their payday that, quite frankly, most of us have been beneficiaries of. We've all probably experienced some of the pay inflation, and I'm not going to complain.
Right. And Lance, if you want to take us home on that one.
Yeah, just to add a little bit to that. When I first came to the firm, and then we got a new CKO, one of the first things he asked me to do, he said, write a position description for an LPM analyst, or LPM data analyst. And it was funny, when I first did the description, data wasn't really a part of it. It wasn't nearly as big a part of it. So I looked back at it the other day, the description I wrote, a year and a half ago is no longer nearly covers what I would need in an LPM analyst. So it just shows you the evolution of the position, which I think is good, but also drives up the price of that person, right? If I say, well, you have to have your PMP certified and I need you to be familiar with databases and how to harvest data and Power BI, whatever it may be. But it's just been the evolution of LPM. And yeah, it is tough to find qualified people. LPM at Ogletree resides under KM. So there's a lot of crossover there. And I think I'm hopeful that we might be able to market that in the future, that there's other avenues you can take outside of LPM. If that's something you'd like to do, whether that's successful or not, we will see. but and just involving people in different aspects, and if they have the time, and just letting them learn different skills and see how other things operate, I think is something that we're going to have to do in the future, or you're just going to lose people. They're just going to move on to something, like Mike and Crudy said, from a legal analyst or legal LPM analyst to manager. You're just going to always lose them. But that's a challenge in every industry and every position you ever had. But LPM, it's just, I think, a little more magnified.
And there's a question that came in. I'll let Andrew read it to you, and sorry, Lance, I'll pick on you. We'll read the question. We'll let you do it first, and then Crudy, if you want to take a stab at it, and then Mike, and then I think we'll bring it home with one last question. So go ahead, Andrew.
Morgan asked, for those becoming interested or who are interested in LPM, which certifications are most in demand? Are there specific PM styles that work especially well in the legal context?
Yeah, for me, I mean, PMP certification certainly helped. It was, something that I had led projects since my early days in the corporate world, in the legal world, but I just never formally went out and went through the process. And there was a little more to it than I ever thought there would be, but I think it's well worthwhile getting that certification. And then I'm certified in Agile and Scrum, and I went out and got a little bit of programming language certification, just with all this database and database management coming into play. For me, that's what hit home. I know Crudy and Micah are certified in other ways, so they, I'm sure, have more to say about this.
Micah, you want to take a stab at it? Or sorry, Crudy, you want to take a stab at it? Then Micah.
PMP, definitely. I also think Six Sigma, and in the legal industry, we have Lean Sigma, Yellow Belt, Green Belt is super important. I think also getting involved with some of the organizations like Legal Value Network and others is absolutely critical. Learning from your colleagues is super important.
I think for me, it's more what are you bringing from your holistic background? If you were saying what certification that's LPM specific, I'm a fan of some of the certifications through TVPI, True Value Partnering Institute, but partly because they do require some level of experience in that space as that legal project manager before they give out those certifications. So that's just kind of showing that you've done it, you've proven it, and you have enough of the tick boxes to have that certification. But generically, something you get outside of legal, PMP is great. I haven't seen Six Sigma be as in demand for law firms, but I've seen increasing demand for legal operations in-house asking for Six Sigma. But I'm biased, I have one of those, so I think that's great too.
So, okay, so there's two more questions, but before we get onto those, I have a question, more of curiosity for me. And it sounds like you guys have started to answer this. Does law firm experience matter anymore in this position?
I'd say yes.
I will say 100% yes, Rob. I've hired too many pricing professionals and LPM professionals over the last 18, 24 months, where when they don't have it, it just becomes a little bit problematic. There's a vernacular and there's a rhythm in the legal industry that absolutely is critical for this job in particular.
Okay, I'm going to push back in a second, but go ahead, Micah. I wish we had more time.
I think what it comes down to, especially on the law firm side, is that law firm culture is specifically unique. They've done studies on why legal professionals are different than the normal standard American population. They're more stubborn, they're more skeptical, and all these things that make them more unique to deal with. And I think if you come in thinking like it's just every other industry, you may not understand how to better get, buy-in and work with these people who are very smart, very intelligent, and very busy. And I think that law firm culture really makes it difficult for someone to break in. Not impossible, but I think if you've already shown you can work in that environment, you're better off.
Okay. Lance, before I burn this house down?
Yeah, I can sum it up in, I think, one or two lines here for me. Is it's very difficult to change successful people. And you have to have that mentality and that persistence and that approach. You're not going, to bludgeon anybody into doing LPM. That's not going to happen. So you've got to do it in the right way. And I think understanding the functioning of law firms certainly helps. And maybe even more importantly, the personalities of lawyers themselves.
Yep. Okay. So if you bring somebody out from outside of legal, if we're saying we can't do that, because I'm hearing two things. I'm hearing we've got a very narrowing talent pool because we're hyper focused on certain things. But I'm just asking, can you broaden it, and could you potentially teach them that? Because right away you're narrowing your scope by saying you have to have law firm experience. And so I'm going to sit here, no offense, I'm going to complain that I can't get anybody, but I'm making it so narrow that it's impossible to get somebody. So I'm going to pick on you there.
I should expound on my initial statement, which is I think I have to put a demarcation line between pricing and legal project management. I think on the pricing side of the house, it is absolutely critical to get legal industry experience, and we're definitely boxing ourselves in, unfortunately, but it's just too difficult otherwise because it is such a unique bird. On the LPM side, I think that there's an opportunity to take advantage of organizations like Clock, other legal operations professionals on our, working with our clients. I think there's an absolute ability to harness talent, excuse me, as well as the Big Four.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, fair enough. That I agree with that. Micah, before we bring one last question and before we bring Toby back in.
Okay, I would say I just think that if we're talking about like kind of that mid-level LPM manager level, yeah, I'd want them to have ideally law firm experience. But if we're talking entry-level analyst or something like that, yeah, they're not going to have partner meetings by themselves on their first day of work. So I think we can teach that over time. But once you get into that medium kind of experience range, yeah, I do want you to have law firm experience.
Okay,
that's
fair enough. And I think that there's a statement that just came in, I'll read it, which I think is actually a pretty good one by Joe here, which is, you don't need law firm experience, you need emotional intelligence. I would say you need that generally. So yes, I agree there. So I think, well, do we have time for one last question, Toby? Yeah. All right. So this was one that I had held in reserve for ourselves. And I think given where our conversation's been going, there's a couple more in the chat that are way too long, I think, for us to get to, but we'll make sure that we get people's feedback and send it out afterwards. We talked a bit about people, process, tech, which is great. How do you cajole a partner who does not want to follow the process, Lance?
Yeah, it's an education process, to tell you the truth, and those success stories go a long way. We are Ogletree, and I love the firm for it. They're never going to be draconian. They are never going to tell somebody you have to project manage. You use LPM. Other firms have done that, and sometimes I envy them because they're like, okay, I got to do it. Let's learn how to do it. But I don't think in my opinion, I don't think that's a great approach. I think getting the buy-in over time is the way to do it, and we've had some success with that. But once again, you've got to illustrate how you can do it, and you've got to make it a simple process. If I gave them a budgeting tool, I've said this, Rob, I always had the click test. If those attorneys have to click more than about 5 times to open a budget and get going, they're done. They're going to look at it and say, I'm out, sorry. So I think those two things, just getting the buy-in through success stories and making it a simple solution, and then they see the power of it. And I will say, once again, in a compliment to BigHand, when they have seen those analytics and we've pulled up on budget, worked hours, those kind of things, they're like, we've even had some wows where people have gone, wow, this is really tremendous. This is very helpful. So we hope to keep building on that and get some of the more reluctant believers to transition.
Nice. Quickly, Crudy, then Micah, then Toby, because I think we got a minute left. So
quickly.
Think big, start small.
Sorry, Toby.
Think big, start small, and just only take specific aspects of LPM that would impact that particular partner and make his life or her life that much more easier. You can't give them everything all at once.
I agree. And honestly, from my perspective, it's if I can talk to that attorney, learn more about their practice and identify certain problems that they're having with clients or just their practice generally, that I can solve the LPM, great, let's solve those. They not be the whole LPM, like Crudy was saying, but if I can solve their personal problems, great.
Yeah, Toby, sorry.
Well, first of all, this has been a fantastic program. I especially like the bonus topic. Although it scares me because I always worry about being poached from, but hey, I got a good team. So thank you all for your day or for your time today. Again, great dialogue, great back and forth, great information. I'm certain the Lvn members who attended this are walking away with high value. But also special thanks to Rob and Andrea and BigHand for sponsoring this. We really appreciate the partnerships that help drive the success of Lvn. Thank you to our attendees. And as a reminder, you'll get a brief survey that will be available to you after the webinar. Please take the survey. We appreciate the feedback because we're always trying to improve on our program. we appreciate you obviously taking the time with us today. And we look forward to seeing you at more LVN informative webinars in the future. So with that, I'll just say have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.